Shakespeare self-tapes can be really tricky. So if you're working on a Shakespeare monologue and you need to put it on tape, then definitely stick with me here because I'm going to share some of the common problems I see come up in Shakespeare self-tapes as a Shakespeare coach who watches a lot of Shakespeare self-tapes. And stick around right till the end because I'm going to share a particularly sneaky one that you might not have thought of. And of course, I'm going to share how to solve all of these problems. Right, so before we jump in though, let me introduce myself in case you don't know me. I am Sarah Gio, this is Shakespeare with Sarah, and my goal for you is that Shakespeare should feel really doable and in fact, actually quite fun because it is really rewarding and it's really great training as an actor. So, even if you're new, you can totally do this. Let's jump in. So the biggest problem with Shakespeare as a self-tape is actually kind of obvious, but let's spell it out just in case you haven't thought about it. Shakespeare is designed for the theatre, right? And we're putting it on film. And if you've ever watched a theatre production that's been filmed, it often looks kind of terrible. It can look really big, it can look over the top, or it can just look clunky. But you do have to kind of roll with that. You have to grin and bear it and get a little comfortable in the discomfort of that. And let me tell you why. Shakespeare is a heightened form. It has a heightened text. Now, heightened, I'm going to give you a really basic rundown of what I mean by that in case you're new to it. But actually, what I'd love you to do is watch this video, which I'll also link in the description, where I talk in more detail about what heightened really means and how we can handle it so it makes us better, more versatile actors. So it's actually a really, really great thing to dig deeper into. But short version for now is a heightened text contains elements beyond the everyday. So in Shakespeare, that's the poetry. It also has it has a heightened style, right? It basically has higher physical and vocal energy. Now, your temptation when you're doing a Shakespeare self-tape might be to reduce that physical and vocal energy because, of course, it's going to look really, really big when you do it as a self-tape. But you don't want that. You don't really want to reduce it too much. You might a little, but not too much. Because when you're doing a Shakespeare self-tape, you've got to think about what this is for. It's usually going to be for either a theatre production, maybe an audition for a theatre production, or for a drama school audition. If you're doing it for just practice, then you do what you like. But for a theatre production or drama school audition, actually what they need to see is your physical and vocal energy. They need to see what you're doing with the language and what you're doing with the body. And actually, with drama school, that's one of the reasons they love seeing you Shakespeare is because it is an opportunity for you to use your body, right? What I want you to do firstly is don't run away from that. You need to actually kind of embrace that it's going to be a bit bigger and make sure when you're watching your self-tape back, try not to judge it on whether it looks kind of big, right? We are always, always, always still going for truthfulness. It doesn't mean that you're going to be fake and waving your arms around. You're always coming back to that truthfulness and the connection to the body. But that's a really, really big topic. So I highly recommend watching that video. I've also got a video on making Shakespeare natural. I've got a video on what drama schools are looking for where I talk about those kinds of elements. So go deeper in that. I've got a heap of resources for you and subscribe, because there's heaps of stuff for you. But for now, I just want you to keep in mind, don't run away from energy. Because this is actually the biggest problem that I see is that people will go, oh my goodness, it's so big. They will reduce their energy, so they're playing it much more filmically, let's say, and it's a lot more pared back. And what happens is either they're not showing what the audition panel needs to see because they don't know whether you're going to be able to handle, say, a giant Shakespeare in the Park space, or you're actually going to become a little bit dull with it. You're not going to be able to make the most of the language and all the other things going on, and it's going to actually look quite flat. So this is really, really common problem, a trap that actors fall into that makes their performances kind of dull or not helpful. So an audition panel can't actually assess you on what they're really looking for. So let's talk about the solution, right? It's actually not so tricky. Firstly, you want to try and get the widest shot possible. A wide shot will help you because it's going to not be drilling down so close on like all the little micro expressions. It's actually going to give you more space to express, and it's going to not blast the camera so much. So whatever kind of wider shot you can do is important. Now, for me personally, you can look at self-tapes on my channel. I don't have a lot of space, so I can't do a particularly wide shot. So I just have to try and find that balance. But you can just, if it's for drama school, and most of the time for theatre productions, they don't really care about your backdrop or anything like that. So don't stress about backdrop. Don't stress about lighting. Just make sure you can be seen and heard, which we're going to talk about more in a sec. And, maybe like tidy up a few things in the background because that can be distracting. But other than that, it doesn't have to be fancy most of the time. So don't worry about whether you've got an enormous enough backdrop for what you're doing. Now let's talk about that sneaky problem. It's actually something I've already hinted at there. It's actually sound that becomes the problem. When people are doing wider shots, often I find people submit a self-tape and I can't hear them very well. And that might be because they're just actually further away from the camera and they're not projecting. Or you might have maybe gone into a massive room in your house, or sometimes people even hire out studios that are not really meant for this sort of thing, and it's extremely echoey or boomy. So you need to pay attention to your sound. Now, a really, really simple thing that I want you to do is actually, once you've done your self-tape, regardless of what you've done to fix sound and shot and all that kind of thing, hand it to somebody. Doesn't even have to be an actor, can be a family member or a friend, and just say, can you understand the words that I am saying? Because if they can't hear you properly because it's muffled or boomy, then that's a major problem, because we just can't assess what we can't hear, right? It's a deal breaker. But really, really easy fixes for that is just to deaden the sound with blankets. So for example, I'll actually show you in this room. I started recording today and I was like, whoa, it's super echoey in here because I've got a lot of flat surfaces that the sound is bouncing off. So I just popped some blankets down and I opened my cupboard doors, and it made a huge difference. So you can do that sort of thing if you're at home, and if you're out and about, like honestly, even if you're hiring a studio, take a bunch of blankets with you and put them on the floor. And it often does a lot to help. Otherwise, looking at things like a little mic attachment, like a Rode mic that you can stick on your phone, or a lapel mic, anything like that is helpful too if you're thinking you're going to be doing this thing more often. But otherwise, think about your projection, think about your deadening of surfaces, and you're usually going to solve the problem pretty easily. And I want to give you as well a bonus quick tip about keeping that energy up. It's really, really important with self-tapes, because you want that physical and vocal energy, that you don't get stuck behind the camera all the time, right? Often when we're self-taping, we end up locked in this small space. We're thinking really small, we're worried that we're going out of frame, and then our energy, it drops, and that might also affect, your voice gets quieter, or otherwise you can feel really stuck with emotions. You might find that you feel like you're forcing emotion, and that's actually just to do with that physical frozenness. So when you're shooting your self-tape, I want you to actually take breaks where you run around the room, jump up and down, or you can do it in front of the camera if you want, but it's actually really useful to get out of that space, think a little bigger, and move around to bring that energy back up again. You also might want to play around with a further away focal point. That is one of my favorite things to do with Shakespeare. If I'm doing contemporary, I would put my, little picture or whatever I'm talking to kind of close, or my reader close. But with Shakespeare, it's actually better if I put them further away. So I use, whatever space I can, or I even imagine them, on the other side of a wall, because that will trick my brain and my body into bringing my projection, my vocal projection, but also my energy projection up that little bit more. And that keeps that dynamism going, so you don't end up falling into that trap of, I'm just talking to you like I'm on a coffee table, right? Which doesn't work for Shakespeare. So I'm going to pop that heightened video on screen as well, so you can jump onto that if you want to look at that next, or otherwise look in the description for all those millions of resources I have for you. Okay. All right. So I'll see you very soon in the next video. Keep your learning going. You're doing a great job. Bye guys. See you soon.